VoiceAmerica.com.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Dan and Amy and Mexicans are trying to forestall the imposition of tariffs scheduled for
Monday,
yep.
Enjoy the weekend. Buy your goods now. Go grocery shopping today.
Story coming out of Mexico. Mexico blocks new caravan of Central American migrants. Authorities blocking a new caravan of migrants Wednesday after they entered Mexico bound for the U.S. Soldiers and police forced hundreds of migrants in the group, mostly from Honduras, to halt in a southern town about 7.5 miles from the Mexican-Guatemalan border. The National Migration Institute there said about 420 migrants have been stopped and taken to a detention center by bus, while many others have fled. But Mexico trying to provide shows of good faith that they are trying to quell migrants from Central America from making their way to the southern border.
Well, the numbers are in for the month of May. 144,000 in 1 month illegals tried to cross into this country. That's unheard of. So President Trump, he says he needs to do something. And before he left for Normandy from Ireland, where he was golfing, you know, he doubled down on these tariffs.
We've told Mexico the tariffs go on, and I mean it too. And I'm very happy with it. And a lot of people, senators included, they have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to tariffs. They have absolutely no idea. We're the piggy bank. The United States is the piggy bank. It has all the money that others want to take from us. But they're not taking it so easy anymore. It's a lot different.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you some context to how this problem has metastasized over the last 2 years. In May of 2017.
Yeah, how many?
CBP, Customs and Border Protection, apprehended 14,500 people. In May of this year, 132,887 people.
Okay, and they were CBS and ABC reported it was 144,000. But, I mean, still, the numbers are staggering compared to what they used to be.
In the first 8 months of the fiscal year 2019, border agents apprehended nearly 56,300 unaccompanied children at the border, as well as another 333,000 migrants traveling as part of a family. So what you incentivize, you beget. You incentivize people to send unaccompanied children to the border, knowing they'll be taken in, and that's what you get more of. You incentivize families to be treated as a family unit, whether or not you can verify they are, and that's what you get more of. You don't. You essentially release those seeking asylum into the United States, hoping they'll show up for their asylum hearing. 9 in 10 do not. So you get more people coming to the border, seeking asylum, so they can be released into this country and never collected.
And the border wall isn't completely finished, so let's go now.
For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Bill Gertz, senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon, author of the book I War, War and Peace in the Information Age. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan and Amy. Good to be on the show.
I know we want to talk about the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, but why don't we start at our border and your reaction to the problem there and what Trump is trying to do and what Congress apparently has no interest in even acknowledging.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's reached crisis proportions. The president has made it clear, as part of his America First foreign policy that he's going to take steps to try to pressure Mexico into really sealing off these mass migrant flows. I mean, I think the thing that triggered it was that group of 1,000 people that came across, and then they finally said, hey, look, enough is enough. We've got to take steps to keep this from happening. I mean, this is going to create huge problems for the border states that have to deal with this flow of this population into the United States.
But do you think President Trump should use tariffs as a way to control security along the border? I mean, I just think that they're separate issues.
Yeah,
I'm the one who's going to have to pay extra
money. He's reluctant to put troops there to enforce it. He wants Customs and Border Protection to do it. He's added more forces to Customs and Border Protection, but and I think it's political pressure through economics. That's kind of been his key feature. He regards national security as intricately entwined with economic security. So he's using the economic tools to try to pressure the Mexicans. We'll see if it works. He likes tariffs. We've used them on the Chinese. It's definitely having an effect on the Chinese. They're feeling the pinch. Their economy is definitely in decline, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. For the Chinese leaders, it's stability equals continued economic growth.
Speaking of China, Secretary of State Pompeo taking the occasion of the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square to pressure the Chinese government into releasing details of the massacre that occurred at their hands some 30 years ago. Of course, that is unlikely to happen, but is this just an effort to shame China to the table, or just to, frankly, it's required morally for the United States to make a point about that massacre and remind people of the thugs that are the Chinese communists in charge of that country?
This is really significant. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is the first senior U.S. official. The State Department went back and looked at various anniversary statements by U.S. officials, and this is the first time that a Secretary of State has demanded that the Chinese give a full accounting of this massacre. And, the Chinese have been given a pass on it for 30 years, basically. They've covered it up. CBS did a report where they went to Tiananmen Square and they showed people pictures of the tank man, this one lone shopper standing in front of a line of tanks. And most of the people either pretended they didn't know or honestly didn't know what this was about. So I think it's really significant that we remind people that this is the real, true nature of the communist regime in Beijing, that they would use tanks and armored vehicles to crush as many as 10,000 people were killed in the massacre back in 1989.
Well, we mentioned this the other day when we were talking about it on the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. And, yeah, I mean, the repression, the censorship, the gaslighting. There was a study done a few years ago. China's top 4 universities, only 15 out of every 100 Chinese students at their top universities that were asked to identify the iconic photo of Tank Man in front of the Chinese tank could identify it. That's how closed off they are from information the government doesn't want them to see.
Yeah, the Tiananmen massacre was a major setback for democracy efforts in China. One of the things that came out on the 30th anniversary this year was a new document that was made public. It's in a book that's coming out, but it was published in the journal Foreign Affairs, and Andrew Nathan, the Columbia University political science professor, wrote about it, and it showed that back in 1989, there were really divisions within the communist leadership. There was a real movement towards democracy, towards getting rid of the totalitarian, authoritarian communist system. But it was Deng Xiaoping and the hardliners that succeeded and took over, and that has been the policy since. And as you mentioned, it has been given new emphasis in Xi Jinping, the current Chinese leader, who has conducted a massive crackdown on Uyghurs and others, religious believers of all sorts. They've closed off the internet. They're basically, I was in China in June of last year with Defense Secretary Mattis, and the place is like an information desert. It's a totally controlled information environment, and you really notice it because we live in an information age. We're so used to having the freedom to access whatever, Twitter, Facebook, any news outlet we want, but that's not the case in China. I think it's a real vulnerability. I think the Chinese people, they want freedom. They want to get rid of the communist regime, and the United States needs to help them. I think Pompeo's statement on the anniversary will be a good step in that direction.
Well, when you were there, were you able to get onto the internet at all?
I was, but it was completely censored. The only way I was able to file was I brought a rented cell phone, and then with that cell phone, I was able to set up a Yahoo email account. Like I said, Google is blocked, so that means YouTube is gone. Twitter and Facebook are blocked, but they do allow Yahoo, and that was the only way I could file. But again, it was very limited. A lot of websites just had a blank space when you tried to boot them up.
Yeah, maybe they'll allow Twitter in China now that Twitter was doing some of the dirty work for the Chinese government and repressing anti-Chinese tweets on the occasion of the Tiananmen Square anniversary.
Yeah, they did do that. I just saw a tweet yesterday from China which said that Twitter has required people in China who use the service there, and they have ways around the so-called Great Firewall, which blocks incoming and outgoing internet access, that they're making Twitter users there connect to a phone call to verify them, and then that's how the authorities are able to locate people in China using Twitter, and they're beginning to crack down further. Again, This is like it's like the 1984 totalitarian system of information control.
This seems to have been lost in the mix. That's what the Chinese communists are. They're Chinese communists. Yes. That's what communist regimes do. They repress and oppress and imprison and torture and destroy. I mean, this seems to have gotten lost in this sort of siloed discussion solely about intellectual property piracy.
Absolutely. I mean, you nailed it right on the head there. And the thing is that's happening in China right now is that the government is being eclipsed by the party. So what you have is the Communist Party of China is literally taking over what used to be quasi-official government systems, so that all of these agencies and bureaucracies are now being totally controlled by the Communist Party. And under Xi Jinping, they've imposed strict Marxism, Leninism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is their version of communism on all of these agencies.
And how should we interpret President Xi with Putin this week? All smiles. Is this like high school politics, sending Trump a message? If you're not gonna, if you're gonna continue imposing tariffs on us, I'm gonna go make nice with Putin, and or how should we interpret it?
Yes, that's what it's about. China's trying to play the Russia card against the United States. I think the U.S. should play the Russia card against China. Of course, we need to get a successor regime to the Putin regime, which is, again, once you start invading another country, we learned back in the 20th century that's not a good system. But, yeah, clearly the Chinese are trying to make a common cause with the Russians. Both of them are building their policies on an anti-U.S. perspective, trying to defeat the United States as the leading power in the world that has set the rules-based international order, and they're trying to upend that and impose the communist or the Russian authoritarian model on the world.
He is Bill Gertz, senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon, author of the book I War, War and Peace in the Information Age. You get his columns about Pompeo and the Chinese at Washington Free Beacon. Bill Gertz, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM.